A new episode and a new perspective on today's episode of The Changeover. Coming up.
I think a lot of B2B organizations who publish content are in big trouble because, again, that commodification of all of it, we need to go beyond creating content and learn how to create creators. Like, we're all commodities today as just experts. How do I break you out of that commodity cage? Okay, I start to think about there's a couple dimensions to that. You got to increase your value to other people when you articulate your ideas. You got to increase your originality so you own those ideas. So the media company business model, and we've been saying for years, marketing is like media now, right? The last domino to fall that we seem to resist is, so the people at our brands need to be public communicators in a much more high impact way, and we should reward that.
Welcome back to the Changeover Podcast. I'm Greg Linnemanstons. Today, we'll explore how B2B leaders can build durable thought leadership without needing a keynote stage, how to keep momentum when star voices inevitably move on, and most importantly, how to stand out when AI is flooding the zone with generic content. My guest, Jay Acunzo, is a storytelling coach who helps leaders develop what he calls signature speeches that use resonance over reach to fuel broader marketing strategies, and he hosts a bi-weekly podcast, How Stories Happen. Welcome, Jay. Well, Jay, you know how excited I am to have you here. Just for our audience to remind them that you're a two-time keynote at Experience Inbound, Wisconsin. And the first time we had you because we listened to some of your stuff, we read some of your stuff, and we said, we'd love to have him. And the second time we had you, it's because we had you the first time. Because the reviews came back, everybody said, if you can get him back, get him back. And so you were here in May at Lambeau and at the Harley Museum, and we couldn't wait to sign you up for this, to get you to say yes to be part of our podcast. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. What we're talking about today is thought leadership, and you've got a lot to say about that. For our listeners, most of our listeners are B2B marketers or salespeople, and lots of them in industrial and complex industries, manufacturing, really big. When you think about the thought leadership game and how it's changed, go back to 2019. What's, as you compare to today, what's changed? What do you see?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. Also, thanks for having me twice at the event. Congrats on, it's now 11 years, right? I helped open the 10th year anniversary. Yeah. That's an incredible feat for Experience Inbound. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
Before we got any further, I needed to say that. I think there's like two main changes that I've seen. One involves like who is the thought leader, and then the other involves what it is you're sharing. And I think it's easier to start with the second. When I kind of came up through the rise of content marketing, working as head of content at HubSpot, working for small startups and a VC firm in these content-centric roles, somebody could sort of be declared a thought leader because they showed up with expertise and generously shared that. And like that was a big change for a lot of people, where we used to hoard that stuff or just not know how to distribute it well. And along came all these internet tools and these advisors and mentors and other organizations teaching marketers how to go to market through content. And it became this game of how do I showcase that I know things worth knowing? Mm-hmm. And simply doing that, people might go, Greg's a thought leader, or Acme Inc. is full of thought leadership. I'll pick them, I'll stick with them, I'll refer them. So it became this game of sharing expertise. Now, the hardest truth I think we need to embrace, especially in B2B, is that expertise on your space has been totally commodified. It is foundational. Yeah. I don't want people running around with no expertise claiming to know stuff. No, it's foundational. The way that like a reporter knowing the facts of something they're reporting on is also foundational. It matters that much. But expertise is found everywhere. And I can get it pretty much anywhere and quickly. And that's not a game you want to be playing, because you can't charge a premium for that. You can't stand out through that. It's really hard to do the work that we're trying to do to build our businesses if all you do is share what you know. And it turns out what you say and how you say it need to follow, right? It's not what you know, it's what you say, how you say it, how you make them feel. And so not just sharing expertise, but also creating IP, intellectual property, not on your product level, but on the marketing level. Like, what's your big idea that you own? How do you articulate your message? Do you articulate it in a way that helps me feel how you feel or see what you see? In fact, how do you see your space, your perspective, your stories, your voice? All these things matter just as much, if not more these days, than merely sharing expertise. So I like to say to people, the big switch is don't just share content, share IP. And we can talk about that. And then the second change is really about the people. I think a lot of B2B organizations who publish content are in big trouble because, again, that commodification of all of it, we need to go beyond creating content and learn how to create creators, because that trite saying people trust people is true, but we haven't played that out to its logical conclusion, which is just like a media company, we need our leaders, our marketers, our subject matter experts, our people with something to say to be the ones out there saying it. We can't hide behind logos anymore. So those are the two big changes I see.
What's amazing is you were able to talk about change without even mentioning AI. And if you think about it, I mean, AI is absolutely overwhelming us in every aspect of content. We pulled a report that said right now 72% of B2B buyers are encountering the AI overviews in Google. So it's you can't avoid it. What do you think this means as we think about thought leadership and companies that want to embrace thought leadership? What do they need to consider?
I think of AI, I have a metaphor for this. Imagine you created the car and you drive the car up to a field of marketers where they play. And the marketers get all excited because they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And you're like, I know, I worked really hard on inventing this. I'm very proud of myself. And they're like, you're a genius. You invented this? Yes, I did. It has flashlights on it, say the marketers. And you start massaging your temples and you're like, yes, the car has some lights on the front of it, and then before you can continue, the marketers run around the world screaming about how amazing these flashlights are and 25 hacks to use flashlights more effectively and how flashlights are disrupting writers and all these things. And the creators of the car are going, yeah, you can light some stuff with this. Can we please talk about all the very many car-like things it can do? So I see generating content as one of the least impactful, lowest value activities we could possibly be doing through AI. Other things might include synthesizing mounds of data or transcripts with prospects and customers, like making sense of patterns, using constraints to train it on things like, this is our message. Here's a post that I wrote. Does it align with my message? If not, please suggest changes. Like, it's a much better kind of applier of pressure or synthesizer of overwhelm than it is a creator of things, which I still think it has to come from the individual. So that's how I see it, is like, we've taken this technology that if you know the technology, you're probably like, this is really profound. And I think we're kind of using it in a very rinky-dink way.
I like the flashlight. I had never thought about it that way, but we did all go running to what a cool flashlight.
Yeah, superficial. It's obvious that it can do that, but just because it can do that, I don't know if that's the highest impact way to use it.
You're a thought leader when it comes to communication and the way you frame it for people like us and our clients. A lot of the people that we talk to about that jump instantly to, oh, you want me to make speeches?
Yeah, right.
And that's something that, number one, that's one of the things they're most afraid of, that and death, is making speeches.
Sure.
And they also don't have the access. They don't have the opportunities to really entertain that as a viable channel for them. So when you think about helping to coach and helping to develop thought leaders, what are other ways that they can do that? What are the approaches that you start to advocate for? Yeah,
I mean, fundamentally, while I do work with executives and teams and individuals on their speaking sort of centric thought leadership, using their voice as an expert everywhere, inclusive of formal speaking, it really begins with, like, a lot of times we leap to the things that are downstream from the source of our communication power. We leap to, what content should I create? For example, a speech, and many, many other things. Or we think, well, to increase the impact of that content, I need to tell stories or have an overarching cohesive brand story. None of those are unimportant, but I think further upstream from that is the source of your power, which is this concept of what is your premise? And a premise is this idea, this core idea from which the rest of the work follows. So it aligns your team, it spawns better ideas. It's like drawing a coherent circle around your platform and increasing the impact of that platform. And you can think of a premise as a way of articulating or showing others what your perspective is in a memorable, repeatable manner. Because that really is the job of the marketer and the leader. It's not just to say the one thing one time, it's to go and own that concept in people's minds, right? You can't own an audience, but you can own an idea in their minds. That's your premise. Yeah. So like one of the most famous premises out in the world today is from the author James Clear of the book Atomic Habits. His premise is a perfect example of how to try and articulate yours, because it sounds like an insightful reframe on a familiar topic. The familiar topic is habits. Lots of people talk about habits, explore habits, create content, tell stories about habits, right? Commodified. The topic is commodified, but how James Clear sees it separates him. So his premise, again, the reframe on the familiar topic, you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. So there's here's the current wisdom, here's the new wisdom, here's your way, here's the better way. He pivots off the current conventional wisdom, which gives this idea like a certain momentum. It's like kinetic to experience a really good premise. There's a before and an after moment. Or my business's premise is thinking resonance over reach. To grow your business, you're out there doing a lot of marketing. Maybe you're marketing more than you ever have. And I say to the world, don't market more, matter more. Because when you matter more, you have to hustle for attention less.
And I'll bear testimony to the first time I heard you say that, I instantly started to think about the definition of resonance.
Yes.
And to really grasp it and to say, that's to be meaningful to your audience. It's to have relevance. It's to be authentic to them. It's all those. It's a rich premise. And so
thank you.
Congrats on your premise is real. It had the audience you could see thinking and learning and trying to figure out how does that apply? How does that idea of premise apply to my business, my industry, my IP?
Right.
Can you go on about?
Sure.
I'm gonna put some cards down. That premise is the foundation of your IP pyramid.
Correct. So there's like categories of thought leadership that you want to eventually over time create coverage for, right? So the foundation of your thinking, whether you're that individual thought leader, an individual working in-house carrying a brand's banner, or you're thinking about your whole team, that premise is that foundational layer. And then you want to start creating IP through and around it, which is like your big idea is your premise, but all the thinking around it that is necessitated by and enhanced by the premise. Because like you said, you thought about the definition of resonance. If I'm going to run around the world saying resonance all day long, I ought to define it for marketers' use, right? I ought to define it for an executive or leader's understanding. So I look at the dictionary definition, I look at the sciences, and this takes me like 30 minutes, right? This is not me halting the consultancy that I run. This is me taking the time that I would normally write a generic how-to post and instead replacing that with, well, I'm exploring this one premise. That's what the next post is about. The logical next question that people would have for me is, this terminology I keep using, what do you mean by that, guy? So let me define resonance, right? And so that's the next layer of what I call the IP pyramid, or a thought leader's IP pyramid, where you move from your premise, which deserves some articulation and exploration all by itself, just to figure out what you're saying, to defining key terminology. And then once you define key terminology, you might have methodology. Here's my advice for the world, how to and how to think. Maybe you have a proprietary method, or maybe you're just giving out advice. But it's stronger when it sits on top of a clear premise and clear terminology that you routinely define and share with others, right? Because that's the third layer, is where we normally leap to. It's the method stuff. It's the advice stuff. And then the two layers above that, any kind of frameworks you can use to crystallize and codify all that stuff. And then signature stories that you can use to really bring it to life. So from the bottom to the top quickly, you have a premise, which necessitates some terminology you define or at least curate. Then you have methodology, some advice you share with the world, whether it's a repeatable system or just good advice here and there. Then you have signature frameworks hopefully emerging from that advice to really make sense of it and help people move around their understanding. And at the peak, you have signature stories, which is when I think people go, oh my gosh, like you're my favorite voice. You're my favorite brand, because those stories are really about the emotional connectivity of all this really smart stuff. Again, IP, not just expertise.
And the signature frameworks and the signature stories have to be consistent with your premise, with your source of resonance.
Yeah, that's right. Like, again, if I say my premise is resonance over reach. Or James Clear says, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. He might eventually go on to create a visual representation of developing stronger systems. Or I need to and have figured out, okay, if I'm going to increase the impact of your ideas, your messages, your words, how do I visualize that? Like, we're all commodities today as just experts. How do I break you out of that commodity cage? Okay, I start to think about there's a couple dimensions to that. You got to increase your value to other people when you articulate your ideas. You got to increase your originality so you own those ideas. Let me just sketch out two different, like one spectrum for value, what's on the extremes, one spectrum for originality, what's on the extremes. Oh, extremely valuable would be an insight. Extremely original would be something very personal to you. So how do we calibrate ourselves using these visual frameworks? Let me show you where you're at, show you where you want to go, show you what's in the way, and work with you to help, right? So like this is over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, Greg, of developing this material. But the best way I can sort of sum this all up is, what if you wrote the best-selling book in your space? You had such sharp ideas that you could just press it into a book. And then every time people went to a conference in your industry, every time people you want to sell to had a closed door meeting that you don't even know exists, someone in that room or at that conference goes, oh yeah, it's like that guy Greg says. And then they cite your words, right? Like the authors we admire, the public speakers we admire, the individual thought leaders we admire, they're onto something about how they own ideas and communicate that like an executive, a marketer, an entrepreneur really needs to adopt. And you don't need to have their business model to do that. You don't have to quit and go tour the world as a speaker to communicate with that level of impact.
As an aside, Jay, when you suggested that people at a conference were referencing me, I got goosebumps. Just saying.
You know what it's like? I'm Italian. Anyone who sees the vowel at the end of my name can understand, or they see my hair gel in my hands. I joke I have 3 stereotypical Italian stereotypes. They all start with H. It's hands, hair gel, and hair. So I'm very obviously Italian. It's like in The Godfather, where he's at the child's baptism and his goons are doing the work for him out in the field, you know? It's like, imagine you're just going through the routine and the opening keynote of a massive conference in your space, that speaker is quoting you. Like that's influence. Forget followers, right? Forget reach. That's resonance. That's what we're after.
Yeah. Now, how do you turn from advocating the thought leadership development and being intentional about it to managing what some leaders would look at as risk? Okay, I'm growing branding of our thinking and our ability to influence our targets' thinking, but I'm representing it in people, and people are fragile. People quit. People die, people retire. What's the advice that you give to business leaders to manage that, to try to create a hedge for themselves?
Totally. I think it is completely understandable that people would go, what if the person who's an exceptional communicator on behalf of my brand leaves? And to that, I say 2 things. One, you just described, or I guess in your head, a reality where no media companies have ever succeeded. Because where they earn their trust is not the logo of the company. That is, your trust in the logo is the byproduct of the bylines, the columnists, the reporters, the hosts, the storytellers you read. So the media company business model, and we've been saying for years, marketing is like media now, right? The last domino to fall that we seem to resist is, so the people at our brands need to be public communicators in a much more high impact way, and we should reward that. So that's one thing, is like, well, actually it's a concern for sure, but there are many business models that have gotten around that. And I think they get around that by saying, instead of being fearful about that, what if I had a wall of fame in my office? I'm the CEO of this business. I got a wall of fame where like Greg is out starting his own consultancy, having started here, cutting his teeth here, telling stories at conferences, writing great content, hosting video series, hosting podcasts on behalf of our brand. I knew Greg when, and I had an influence in his development. Like, imagine that scenario. Because by the way, product teams have to worry about top talent leaving. Engineering teams certainly have to worry about like technical talents at a premium. This is not unique to marketing. And if you're worried that someone with a public voice and platform leaving is going to make news in your space, you should be so lucky, because that means people are paying attention and people adore both what they've done for you and who they are as a person.
When you think about getting into the weeds about advice to business owners, leaders, about how to get their people involved in non-keynote leadership manifestations, what's the advice that you're providing them? What direction are you pushing them toward?
Yeah, so I only ever work with the CEO or the founder or the founding team or the executive team on, some people might call it a strategic narrative for the company, but it really is, people who know music know the name Rick Rubin. He's this famous music producer. He worked with like the Beastie Boys and Johnny Cash. His job wasn't to punch buttons and clip audio waveforms for those artists. His job was to be a peer and extract from those musicians their very best. And I think in the corporate world, that does have to come from either the department head or the leader of the whole organization. And I do think a CEO, even of a global brand, I've worked for HubSpot and Google, the CEO and their lieutenants, they influence the brand already in ways that maybe we don't want to admit. So it's already happening. What if it happened to our advantage, right? And so working with those leaders, I would extract sort of what would be effectively the keynote they would give to the entire market. But then as you look at this keynote, it kind of reads like an argument for the market to buy into our way of seeing this field as separate from a competitor. And then once you buy in holistically or in this sort of 30,000 foot view, well, they're going to have follow-up questions, or there's going to be subsections of your audience that you need to address. So I'll give you a quick example. For many, many years, many people in B2B, especially software, have admired the software company here in my town of Boston, Wistia, right? A video hosting and analytics company, kind of end-to-end product suite for video marketers. So they have this big brand story of we want to make business more human. That comes from the top down. But of course, part of that is they want you to film more video. Now, a problem with you trying to make business human and film more video is you yourself have to show up on camera, or your team does. That's a whole bag of cats, right? And so they've had their head of video production, Chris Levine, out in the world for many years now, talking about how to show up well on camera, right? So it's almost like if we're telling this big story to the world, logically, here are some questions people will have, or that we ourselves have. Are we covering those questions or objections through content? That's where the quote unquote stereotypical or traditional content marketer can really shine, because they're going to continue giving advice, continue interviewing experts, continue doing the content that, maybe would be commodified, but it's going to be pressed through this stronger lens of your overall premise, which gives the how-tos and the tips and tricks and the ultimate guides and tutorials a little extra power, right? Because it's clear like why I'd care about it. Or you open that piece with like an argument for your overall story and say, naturally, we got to think today about this topic. You've heard about this topic a million times, not like you're going to hear about today because we just gave you a framing device, which is our overall perspective and premise. Okay, now let's address how to show up well on camera when you feel stiff naturally, right?
And would you say that his premise, the one giving advice, his premise is that anybody can show up good on camera?
Yeah,
exactly. Anybody can do this.
Or like, it might be a version of what John Cleese has said about, from Monty Python fame, what he's said for many years about creativity. It's not a talent, it's a way of operating. So maybe a Chris Levine shows up and says, our job is to make business more human. And it is not like a gift or a skill or a lightning strike moment to be human. You are human. So my premise for how to show up well on camera is not teaching you like media approved techniques to be good on camera. It's actually going to teach you like an inside out approach to identify who you really are, what quirks you bring, what styles make you comfortable, and then deploy that publicly, right? Because he's basically saying it's not a talent to be good on camera. It's a way of operating that starts with the person. We want business to be more human. What makes you who you are? I have a method, I have tips, I have advice for identifying that and putting it on camera, right? So if you're talking to someone like me and I'm awkward on camera or something, Chris might say, Jay, you tell a lot of bad dad jokes, man. Like you should probably start your next video with a bad dad joke. Maybe it makes the cut, or maybe it just loosens you up. But I know that from you, right? So I love what you said, Greg, because it's almost like a Russian nesting doll. It's like the big thing leads to the smaller thing, leads to the smaller thing, but it all feels coherent. And if the premise is well developed, it all feels differentiated.
I'm getting this image in my head of a 3-dimensional pyramid. A self-nesting pyramid where a strong culture business is going to have people who support the overall premise in their own way.
Right.
And they have the opportunity to be the thought leader for getting stuff done. And I think that's what Chris represents for Wistia.
Completely. I mean, just to continue with a very easy, because I've repeated it so many times, with an easy premise, like mine is resonance over reach. So it's kind of clunky to say it this way. But if I were going to advise people write articles, let's say I'm writing a piece about how to write pieces. How do I resonance over reach that article, right? How do I press it through my premise? Well, there's another person out there who might preach the value of whatever. Virality online is a predictable practice, not a lightning strike moment. I teach you how to predictably go viral. Now, I, as Jay, threw up in my mouth just saying those words. I strongly disagree that matters or that we should pursue that. But someone out there might assert that as their premise. If they wrote about how to write well on your blog or on LinkedIn, they're thinking about viral hooks and all these things that I will argue against. So how do I press the same topic that others can write about and have a million times through my premise? I might say, well, we got to open with a story. And here's why, because we're thinking about resonance. We got to pivot to our premise at the end of the story to color the 6 steps for how to write a great article later, which, by the way, anybody might be able to articulate. But now that I've given you the opening story and my overall premise at the end, it's sort of colored differently. It's colored J.
It's colored J,
instead of someone else. Yeah. So you can see the topic is commodified. Even the tips you might give or the advice or like observing and analyzing the trends in your space, all commodified. It's really, can you put on a certain pair of glasses colored you? And more importantly, hand that lens to other people so they care.
Yeah. The signature stories and the signature framework.
Yeah, right. Big part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been great conversation. How does somebody get started? If you were giving somebody tips, if you were giving our listeners tips, because in the end, we're going to be judged on that, Jay. Yep. Come on. Have we given advice that they can act on? So what would you say to people? And I'm going to frame it in the way of our clients and our target, which is private companies for the most part, smaller companies, 200 million in revenue. They don't have huge teams of marketing people, for example.
So to understand this, Greg, I first have to tell you about Myrtle the turtle. So I live in Boston, and one of my favorite places to go with my daughter, Aria, who's currently 6, is the aquarium. And famous in the aquarium is this old green turtle, Myrtle the turtle. She's like gone swimming with celebrities. She's been featured in global ad campaigns. Like, she's a bit of a local celebrity. So we'll go to the aquarium. The other day I'm there and she's like pressed up Aria against the glass of one of the exhibits. And I'm like, I have that dual thought that a lot of parents have, where it's like, I'm in awe of how she sees the world because kids see it different. And I'm so grossed out that she's basically licking a public display. All parents can relate to what I just said.
Yeah.
Especially little kids. Anyways, so she like unsticks herself from the glass. She turns to me and she goes, Daddy, why is Myrtle here? Why do we have aquariums at all? And I was like, that is a great question. How in the world do I respond in a way that she both understands and cares? And that is our job as communicators. You understand me, but more importantly to my cause, you care. And so I like gave it a shot. I said, okay, Aria, well, you know how we want to protect animals and the ocean? She goes, yeah. And I'm like, well, so we need a lot of people to care about that, to be interested in that, and to do things. She goes, okay. And so we hope that by bringing people up close to these animals at aquariums, they'll vote for elected officials who pass laws to protect the ocean. They will volunteer their time themselves. Maybe they go on to become scientists. And she kind of thinks for a moment. She goes, Daddy, I want to be an underwater scientist teacher who sings songs and tells stories and helps people and animals. And I was like, huge parenting win. I called my wife. I'm like, honey, I did it. I did a thing. So like she understood, she cared, and wanted to take action, right? Like, that's the dream of all communicators.
Yeah.
And I realized that's how you have to communicate to all kids, which is you can't give them a wall of smarts. You can't give it all at once. You have to carefully get moments of agreement one after another so they understand and care. But that's not just for kids. That's for people. So the way you start this process is what I call laddering down your ideas from a superficial understanding of your ideas or a relationship with you down deeper with you and your ideas. There are 3 rungs of the ladder. We want, we need, and we hope. So we want some easy moment of agreement with my audience. I say to the world, don't market more, matter more. Everybody wants that easy moment of agreement. You're wandering the world marketing. You're doing more and more. You want it to matter. What if you could matter more so you could hustle less, right? Don't market more, matter more.
Yeah.
That's we want in my messaging. Then the next rung is what we need. We need to embrace, we need to change, we need to think about it this way. We need my premise. If you want to matter more, you need to think resonance over reach. And here's more explanation for that, right? So we want, we need, and we hope. Now you give them the aspiration. You anchor them to the best case outcome, which I always say is you're trying to be the best. Don't be the best. Be their favorite. We can't determine who is actually the best in our field, even though we try so hard to say it. That's not how people make choices. If you resonate and you could become so resonant that they declare irrationally and emotionally that you're my pick, you're my favorite, that's where we want to be, right? So those beats again are we want, we need, and we hope. Align around a goal that they already know they have, get a first moment of agreement with your message. Then assert your premise. Well, okay, if that's what you want, here's how we see it. Here's this assertion I'm making. Here's my premise. Align, and then you assert, and then you aspire to the best case outcome, which ideally they will achieve with you by buying from you or hiring you.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and I like the want, need, and hope, but the want is a goal. The need is the solution. Yep. And the hope is your most aspirational expression.
It's the outcome, right? Yeah. And it's the best case outcome at that, right? And by the way, like we're all really good at saying how we see things, even if it's clunky. And I'm asking people to shave off some of the noise and really sharpen their premise. It's in there, right? It kind of sometimes feel like our idea is like below the surface, but like a fish, like we can't grab it. It keeps skirting away, but like we can kind of see it. We can give you 3 paragraphs and you'll sort of get it, or a coffee meeting with us and you'll sort of get us. And yeah, I want us to be a little crisper than that, but like we can talk about ourselves all the live long day. I think what we struggle with is creating a narrative argument built for buy-in, where we align with people first, then assert how we see it, then aspire them towards something they really hope to achieve and maybe even thought was not possible before. So it's not just I have a premise, it's I can message my premise in a way that they actually understand and care. And so back to talking to a child, it's like I have to get little moments of agreement, beat by beat, all 3 of the rungs of those ladder for them to care, for them to get it, for them to maybe take action, or maybe become an underwater scientist teacher who sings songs and helps people.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, this has been a wonderful conversation. I know everybody's going to enjoy listening to it. As we wrap up, what's the biggest shift you'd want people to have, listeners, in terms of their mindset about thought leadership? What do you want them to think differently after listening to this?
Totally. It begins with curiosity. I think we are about to live through an explosion, a renaissance of human curiosity, because everything that we've been taught from school through the corporate world, it's beaten into us that your worth is having the answer. And now technology can give you the answer instantly. Everything's been commodified in that domain. And I think asking stronger, deeper, sharper, newer questions, that's actually what leads to thought leadership. Because then you say, this isn't right. I see it this way, but I can't articulate it. Why do you do it that way? Why do you not see it our way? And I go investigating, creating content all the while. And then I wake up in 6 months and I have people saying, you're creative, Greg. You're a thought leader, Matt, right? Like that, it's the byproduct later that they declare because you pursued curiosity, not merely shared generalized expertise.
It seems like you're predicting, and I'm excited about the prediction, that curiosity will be the human attribute that's most important, that we should look for most in our team, that surround ourselves with curious people and give them an environment where they can pursue.
Yeah, AI doesn't do lots of things that humans do, but I think most important to this conversation, AI doesn't wonder. Like Arya staring at that tank both wondered at the world and wondered something. And then we get older and that's pressed out of us. It's ground out of us through this like, I've heard people call it like a cultural grindstone. I think that comes from author Chase Jarvis. Like it just like a cultural grindstone removes curiosity, wonder, your sensitivity to the world and what people go through. All of those are such important calling cards for storytellers and thought leaders that we admire and who have a much easier time of winning business too.
Well put. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Changeover podcast. Remember to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Wider.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. Let us know what you'd like to hear about next time by messaging Wider Group on social media. Thanks for watching.